Welcome to Elixir Mix, your weekly Elixir podcast, talking with members of the community. My name is Mark Erickson, and on our panel today, we have Josh Adams. Hello. Michael Reese.
Ship it.
And today we're joined by two guests, David and Cory. David, can you say hi?
Heyo.
And Cory, how are you doing?
Hello and well met, travelers.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code DevChat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code DevChat at Sentry.io.
So we are glad to have them both on because David and I originally started having some conversations on Twitter, and we were having some discussion about involvement in the community and different events that are going on and things like that. And so we wanted to have a discussion about how we as members of the community can contribute to the community. And there's lots of different ways we can do that. Some are contributing Elixir code through open source, writing libraries, contributing to existing libraries, organizing meetups, attending conferences. And we are glad to have you guys on and talk about all this. So welcome. So could you guys give us a little introduction to yourselves?
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm David Bernheisel. I work at a wonderful place called Taxjar. We're a remote company online. We do a lot of software for sales tax. And one of the languages that we use is Elixir. Now, I've personally been working in Elixir for a couple of years now, but I've been loving it. I like to equate it to like when I moved to North Carolina. By the way, I live in Durham, North Carolina. And when I moved to Durham, and Raleigh, both the places, I moved there and I said, you know what? I don't know what it is about this place, but it just feels like home. And so before Elixir, I was writing in Ruby and in JavaScript. And a friend of mine introduced me to Elixir. And oh my gosh, once I understood what was going on in Elixir, I was like, oh man, this just feels like home. And it immediately signed up to Elixir forum and subscribed to all the topics I could on Twitter and just started, consuming everything I could. Yeah. And it took me a good year or two before I could feel like a contributing member of, the Elixir society. One of the first things that I did was, anyone use ASDF here? The version manager?
Yes, all the time.
Very much so.
Oh yeah. So when I started using it, I would, you can type in ASDF list all Elixir and Erlang and stuff. It was one of the first times where you have to have 2 languages installed in order to get this thing to run. And I was super annoyed that the fact that you couldn't see Elixir 170 OTP 22, right? You just had to know that. And so that was one of the first contributions I could make was making that list all of the OTP versions as well. Oh, I was so proud of that. Such a simple thing. Not even Elixir, it's all Bash, but I just loved it so much.
No, that is awesome because that is something that, so I just have a little link to that pull request that you put together, which was merged. Congratulations. Because that is a big step, just to feeling like I am willing to invest enough time and effort into this, and it might be totally rejected. It's but making that effort and putting it out there, that's awesome. Because that is one of those things that has bothered me. That when ASDF, I do ASDF list and to get a list or list all or whatever it is, and I didn't see, and I have to go to the Bob the Builder project thing to see what the options were because I wanted the paired Elixir plus OTP releases. So yes, so thank you.
I will also add a thank you for that. I totally did not realize this is a thing that David had done, but as someone who does NERVs projects, ASDF saves my bacon quite frequently because when you're making a new image, you have to make sure it's compiled with the same version of OTP as what's going to be running on your embedded device and built into your into the release. And I've gotten that wrong before, and it's really hard to debug. Things get a little bit weird. And also, there's a day or two where I lost a lot of time trying to do code optimizations and benchmarking, and then realized that I was actually working on a version of Elixir where I was running on OTP 21, but it was a version of Elixir that had been compiled under OTP like 19 or something. And so I was like, oh, like none of these things are quite the same numbers, and therefore invalidate all of my results. So that's been a big boon. I had no idea that what had gone into that pull request to make that work, but it's been really nice just to be able to say, in this project, OTP 22 and Elixir 1.9 OTP 22.
So let's mention briefly what ASDF is, in case members of the audience don't know, because a lot of people, when they get started with Elixir, they're just going to go, let's say they're on a Mac, they might be familiar with brew, they're going to do brew install Elixir. Or if you're with Linux, you might just be, installing the Elixir that's available in your repos, or even from a PPA or something like that. So what is ASDF, and why should someone care? We covered a little bit of the care, but like maybe David or Cory, you want to take a stab at it and kind of explaining what ASDF is?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. So I used I didn't use ASDF. ASDF is a version manager. You'll see that in the repo name. Actually, it's ASDF-VM version manager. And for a lot of developers out there, myself included, it's rare nowadays to work in one language or one toolchain. And so I had started on Ruby, so I was really familiar with RB-ENV and RVM. I had started to do a lot of React, and so I got in touch with NVM, which is the Node.js version manager, and then RB-ENV being the Ruby environment manager, I guess. And so I guess I got annoyed that I just had to always carry these multiple tools around. At that time it was just two, so big whoop. But once I got into Elixir, and Elixir requires Erlang to run as well, I was like, oh man, now I gotta manage 4 of these things. ASDF, I found ASDF and it seemed to be the widely accepted one in the Elixir community. I don't know if that's true or not, but I just know that you know what? I think now I think of it, I think it was Josh, one of your posts that had like your setup of NeoVim and Elixir, and you were using ASDF, if I remember right. It might be wrong, but
No, you're
that
right.
might be how I found it.
Nice. Yeah, people have to talk about it so people know about it.
Yeah.
You get used to just having it available, so you kind of forget to tell other people that, hey, this is available. So one of the things
and if you're using it, you should use it for like all the stuff, because it makes life a lot better. I like it a lot more than NVM, for instance. And RVM, as much as I loved it, it's a mess.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what I want to make sure people are aware about is that there are plugins available to ASDF. So there's plugins for Ruby, Node, Elixir, Erlang, and many other things. And so you can really use it, like Josh is saying, kind of for all the things. And one of the benefits is, as you change, like in your terminal window, you can change directories into a directory where you have your source code, and it will automatically change the version of Elixir or Node or whatever it is that's for that project. And if you leave that directory and go into another directory for a different project, and they're on different versions, you can just set it to use those versions appropriate for that project, which really makes it easy to work with multiple versions and just work with that. And it's also a great tool for saying, I'm going through the process of upgrading my project to Elixir 1.9, say, as an example. And so I can try that out locally. And then if there's some breaking changes, we can't do it yet, I just flip it back to whatever the current version is I need to work on for shipping code. So it's a great tool to help manage the versions of the base system that you're working on for your development libraries.
Yeah, it even includes tools like non-language tools like Postgres, like database versions, which I thought was pretty interesting too.
Well, cool. Well, we didn't invite you guys to talk about ASDF, so we don't want to spend too much time on there, but we do. I'm glad we were able to talk about the contributions to ASDF and the difference that makes to the community. So the other thing is, I know you guys have also been working on a date time parser. And when I first saw this, I kind of reminded me of maybe like being inspired by Moment.js. If people are familiar with that library in JavaScript, it lets you kind of take different ways of expressing a date or a time, and it can be a little bit, try to be smart about how to interpret that, so it doesn't have to be strictly formatted just this way to be understood. So I'd love to hear about kind of where this came from and how that development went.
Cory, do you want to give us some context, like from Taxjar's perspective of what problem we were coming up with?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Taxjar, we started out as a Ruby shop, and we had some problems that weren't being served well. So we did some experiments with different languages, and Go being one of them and Elixir the other, spun up the exact same service in both languages, and Elixir won out for, developer productivity, and, they were both very performant. So we decided to go that way. So now we're in the state where we've got services in Ruby and in Elixir, and as we migrate them, we need to support the way Ruby does things. And that's where this library came out of. We do CSV parsing, so customers can upload CSVs and they have a date field in there. And Ruby, if you do a date.parse on Ruby, you'll get some amazing results. But then you also add in active support on top of that from Rails. It's even larger. And so we didn't want to break this experience for our customers. They've been using it for years. And so we needed to duplicate the results that they were getting in Ruby, in Elixir. And looking at what was out there now, there wasn't anything that even came close. And so we decided to take a stab at it.
Cool, because I know it reminded me there's a Ruby library, I think it's called Chronic, that would help with some of those kinds of things, which I've worked with in the past. So yeah, that's cool. And so now you guys have open sourced that. Did you have to get like special permission or anything internally to do that? What kind of buy-in do you have from like leadership to say, yeah, we're willing to let you guys share our super secret time secrets?
The conversation was real easy. We wanted to give back to the community. We said, hey bosses, can we do this? And they're like, sure, go ahead. That was that simple. Like, we get so much value from what other people do that, if we have a chance, we're absolutely going to give back.
Yeah, I was really proud to work for Taxjar in that moment where it was that easy. It can be difficult for some companies to let go of that kind of value sometimes, but with daytime parsing, it wasn't like, it's not core to what Taxjar does. It's just a really helpful thing to keep us moving. And yeah, like I remember when we were developing this, one of our first goes it was terrible. The first version of this was just absolutely terrible. It was essentially looking at so Timex. A lot of folks out there might know Timex if they're working in Elixir. Timex is a well-known daytime conversion library out there, made by Bitwalker, I believe, and it can convert times from different time zones. It can do math on the time, so you can tell it to shift back a day or forward a day, that kind of stuff. And it can also format or convert a string into a proper daytime struct or time struct and all that. But the caveat is, and this is what we found in all of the other libraries out there, so it's not just Timex, is that you have to know the format in advance, which wasn't always our case. Like we had so many formats coming in. Some of it was just trash. And so we'd have to, our first iteration of this, which is not released, thank goodness, was just to take all of the known ISO formats out there and just try every one of them and throw them in through Timex and just try. And so if the string matched the first format that we tried, it was super quick. But oftentimes that wasn't the case. And it was towards the end of the list, which ended up being incredibly slow. Like in our CSV parsing logic stuff, that was actually the bottleneck there, which was surprising to me. So that was the first iteration. And then once we realized that there was a performance bottleneck here, I took it upon myself to find a faster way to do it. And that's, we had some ideas about how to do it. And Nimble Parsec, the library by Plataformatech, which is binary parsing, where it can tokenize and parse the strings that you give it, made it incredibly easy. And so the hard part was just coming up with the rules. which is ambiguous. It's guessing at best.
So I'm actually fascinated about the whole area of nimble parsec, and I've seen people use projects like Leaks and Yek from the Erlang standard library before. So this whole area of being able to take a possibly very ambiguous string and find the structure in it, kind of discover that. That's always been something that interests me. Can you talk just a little bit about your experience with using nimble parsec? What was it like to try to learn it? What do your results look like? Do you feel that it's now, like, is it no longer anywhere close to being a bottleneck for your process, or is it still sometimes slow?
Yeah. So nimble parsec made it really easy to code. It's a code generator, for example. So it's like it's a DSL, and I know sometimes Elixir folks tend to look down upon DSLs, but in this case, man, it was so helpful, and I'm not ashamed of it at all. And performance-wise, it's I have a series of benchmarks in the library, so actually anyone can pull it down and give it a shot and see what the results are for themselves. But for me on my machine, I compared it to Ruby's time.parse, and with and without active support. And in this implementation ends up being about 3 times slower than what Ruby's is. Now, let me back that up. Ruby's time.parse is implemented in C with a pile of regex, and it's got a lot of like compile flags in there to figure out, like, is this going to be strict regex or loose regex? And I looked through that source code, and then I could make 100% sense of it. And so a lot of it was just me guessing at what this was trying to do, and also comparing what other libraries are doing. I found a Java one that was written in another DSL, I think, called Ant. And so that was much easier to read and understand, like, what the rules are for, like, when you see this sequence of characters, what it probably means. So it's not machine learning. I'll make that clear. It's definitely not machine learning. It's just looking at a sequence of bytes, and if it finds this, then go on to this other rule, and execute this function. Yeah, and so the programming in Nimble's parsec was like, here's some functions that'll generate code for you, and it'll binary match on all of the strings from character to character, and then on the other side of it, you'll get a tuple with some information in it, and one of those fields is a keyword list of the tokens that you have extracted out of that string. And so you take those tokens and you turn it into something useful, like a datetime struct. And so I wrapped all of those nimble parsec functions into conveniences, and that's the library. In fact, if you even go to the nimble parsec like documentation, they have like some really like rudimentary implementation of datetime parsing. Like it's like this one format, like it doesn't. Anyway, it's just a good example. So I thought that was interesting that they're already thinking about it, and maybe somebody else has a library already, but they haven't released it as far as I could tell.
And one of the ways that you can optimize something you've done in nimble parsec, which is pretty interesting, is you can pass a debug flag to it, and it gives you all the generated code. And you could actually like copy and paste that and not use nimble parsec as a dependency in your project. Like just paste that in. And I watched Jose Valim do this, and I wish I had the link where he was optimizing something written in it, and it flags the function calls with like a number. So it'd be like, do this 1, do this 2, do this 3. And he was going through, it was like, oh, this is 85 different functions. Let's cut this down. And so you can go through and say, oh, I can short circuit here and do this here. And you can optimize your parser and get something more performant at the end by looking at that and just counting the number of functions, which I thought was pretty fascinating.
This episode is sponsored by GitLab Commit. GitLab's inaugural user event brings together the GitLab community to connect, learn, and inspire. Speakers will showcase the power of DevOps in action through strategy and technology decisions, lessons learned, behind-the-scenes looks at the development lifecycle, and more. Learn how to innovate the future of software development by registering today. GitLab Commit Brooklyn, September 17th, and GitLab Commit London, October 9th. You can find it at devchat.tv/GitLab Commit.
I should clarify too, the performance, even though I mentioned it's 3 times slower than the Ruby implementation, that's regex and then C, it's still really fast. Like we're talking, microseconds here, I think. So it's suitable, for use in production. I mean, we're using it in production. And there's several like formats that it supports right now. One of them is Unix epoch times. I'm working on serial times, which I'd never heard of before working with this, which is I don't know if you've ever encountered this, but like sometimes if you get an Excel spreadsheet from somebody else, and they may have done something weird like copy and pasted all values in on top of the like displayed values in Excel, for example, date times can get coerced into like an integer. So you might get something like 42,533 or something, and that's supposed to represent like some day in 2017. So, I always thought, I was like, what is this? Like, I didn't know that was a recognized timestamp. And it turns out that is just I want to say it's Gregorian, but I'm not sure that that's actually the real thing for it. But it's if you start at 0, it's either 1899, like December 31st or something like that, or the first day of 1900, the year 1900, and then you just count up day by day, just 1, 2, 3, 4, and you keep on going. And so the whole number would be a date and no time. But if you do a fraction of that number, then you get the time out of that. And so Excel and other spreadsheet programs will sometimes coerce those date time values into this serial time format. And so we don't have, it's not supported right yet, but I think the next version of datetime parser will support it, and that'll be pretty cool. And then otherwise, it's just standard ISO outputs of the dates. They'll get parsed into real structs, and also everything else that we found from our customers, really. So that's a wide sample set that we used, but yeah, it got all of them. So it was really exciting to get such a good result so early on when developing it.
Do you have any plans to support star dates?
What? Guys like Star Trek fans that you'd even know that is.
Jean-Luc Picard is always like, star date. I'm just remembering because he used like fractions of days. It sounds like the same thing as real time, but probably a different starting point.
That's on the roadmap after we colonize Mars. So
yeah,
here soon. We should get that in.
Can you imagine getting that in CSVs? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that would be interesting when you start. Yeah, like what's interesting is just kind of the idea of time zones, how they became a problem when travel became faster, like when they had trains, and then you had to try and figure out when a train would arrive at a different place, and everyone had different timekeeping. So it's like it is a problem of faster travel. So yeah, as we grow out and expand into the solar system, it will be a problem. We'll have to have something different, but hadn't thought about that. All right. Well, are there any other kind of interesting lessons you learned when you're dealing with date times? I know time zones has historically just kind of been like a mess. I don't know if you had to deal with time zones at all, but just like, is there any kind of stuff that you learned? Like, oh, this was an interesting little tidbit.
David, do you remember the zeros from Ruby?
Yeah. Very confusing, but if you do in Ruby, if you require time in Ruby and then do time.parse like 5 zeros, you get a date back. And I have no idea what this date is supposed to represent. Maybe somebody smarter than me has already figured out that it's some archaic, datetime format or something.
Wasn't it like today or something?
It was, I think it was like some year in 2000, probably like January 1st.
It is January 1st, 2000 at midnight.
There were some real surprising results. And when I started writing the test suite for datetime parser and like comparing it to what the Ruby guys were outputting, I was like, wow, this is surprising. I don't know what this is supposed to mean. I'm just not going to support this right now. I even left some notes, I think, in the test suite. There is one interesting thing I learned while writing the test suite too. Is I don't know if this is really good for a library where you just take an input and just output stuff. And so we wrote a macro around the test library. So instead of just doing test, the name and asserts the stuff inside, it's now a macro where it's like test datetime parsing, and you give it the input and then what the output should be on the other side. And inside that macro, it records the result, what I was given, and then what I was outputting. And at the end of the test suite, and only when the whole test suite has run, write all those results into a markdown file at the very end. And so like that test suite automates documentation basically. So there's a markdown file in the repo just called examples. And so you can like comb through it and just see like, okay, if I give it this, what will come out on the other side, and probably 100 examples in there. So I thought that was really interesting. And that after the entire test suite runs, that hook was introduced, I think, in XUnit for that came with the Elixir 1.8, I believe. So I thought that was really interesting when I came across it. Yeah, there was also another thing I want to keep in mind too. Like, even though that this is parsing dates and times, I default to UTC a lot of times in my own code, and I learned a little while ago that doing that for future times is probably not a good practice. We can we'll link to the show notes, like a good post by Lau, but there's an interesting problem for persisting future date times. And so I'm planning on like making an update to the README of the datetime parser to like mention this. Like, this is a thing to keep in mind. So if you're parsing dates and times that are possibly in the future, the library right now, the parsing library, will default to UTC. And that's probably not a good default for you if you know that you're going to get future time zones, future date times.
I'm curious, could you give a little bit of explanation, just like why that might be a concern? Why might I not want to do that?
Yeah, because it turns out time zones and all that is run by humans, and we like to change things. I don't know if this is enacted or not, but I think Arizona, aren't they saying that they're not going to do time zones anymore? So like that is going to be, I say time zones. That's not true. What I meant
daylight
to say,
savings. Yeah.
Daylight saving. That's it.
Yes.
Which, it affects time zone. So,
yes.
So the thing is if it's going to be persisted and you got the time zone information like today, and then some government, changes the rules about that in the future, that time zone needs to be updated, but you've already done the translation based on old rules at this point. And so you've lost that, and that knowledge to undo that, now that it's persisted in UTC. So yeah, keeping the time zone with it is probably a better thing to do. So that way you can, just in time convert it when needed, based on the current rules of that, that period. So that was a good post that opened my eyes, because like time zone math is like the hardest form of math. Like calculus, easy. Time zones, no, I can't even do it. So anything to like normalize that is always a good thing in my mind for UT. So that's why I tend to just do everything in UTC. But maybe that's not such a good idea.
Interesting. Well, that is a good thought. Just the idea that people change the rules, and so evaluate it closer to when you actually need to act on it. So that's cool. Yeah. So check out the show notes
for lazy evaluation.
Yes.
Sorry, Mark. Can we?
I was going to say, check out the show notes for a link to that article.
Yeah, and I think we should throw in another one. This is another post by Lau, where he talks about falsehoods that people believe about dates and times. And a few of them, I was like falling out of my seat laughing about the time of my life that I've lost to these problems. I'll just give a couple of quick examples here. So like the fact that days contain 60 times 24 seconds, turns out that's not true. There's like leap seconds that get thrown in like semi-arbitrary ways by a committee of people at like an ISO standards committee. The fact that people who observe DST always start in the spring and then roll back in the fall. That's not true. Like in Morocco, the DST kicks in the middle of summer. And anyway, it's like he just basically goes through everything you could almost write a property-based test around. Like every time you think you have an invariant that you could write about a date or date time library, he's just like, no, doesn't work that way because of this country in this year for this reason. So it's a great read if you need a laugh about your own time zone problems.
Yes, I've encountered those problems before too.
Me too. And for those reasons, I just wanted to say extra special thanks to anyone who openly decides that they're going to spend their free time dealing with date times for programmers, because I just don't see it.
You're welcome. And special thanks to Falau. Oh my gosh. His contribution's been wonderful, even to core Elixir. Yeah, that reminds me that while I was developing the stuff for supporting serial date times, apparently there was a bug in Lotus 123 a long time ago that Excel replicated on purpose. They incorrectly believed that the year 1900 was a leap year or something like that, and so it's a day off. I think it's a day off from January 1st, year 1900 to 1900 March 1st. I think, yeah. So that period of time, no, it's not going to be right, probably, because almost everybody uses Excel.
Wow. So you still have to deal with off by one errors historically.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'd love to transition into another way that people can contribute to the community. And one of those ways is organizing or even just attending and contributing to meetups. So I organize a Utah Elixir meetup. Michael has an online-based Nerves meetup. And David, I think you're also running a meetup. Which one is that? And can you tell people about it?
Yeah. So I help run the Triangle Elixir meetup. It's all about Elixir right now. And it serves the Triangle in North Carolina, which consists of Chapel Hill, Raleigh, and Durham. And running meetups is hard. It's harder than I thought it would be. I didn't start this meetup, for the record. So it's been started by some other wonderful folks that have since had families and not has had enough time to put into leading the thing. Yeah, but it's hard. Like it's hard because you go into leading meetups thinking that everybody is super excited like you are. And there are some of those out there, but by and large, like it's I'm not a hype master, so it's difficult for me to like try to hype people up about this this thing that I'm personally very passionate about, but the other folks just aren't going to be as passionate, and that doesn't mean that they're not passionate about it. It's just that everyone else has things going on in their lives that they're that their minds are on instead. And when you have like a position like leading the meetup, kind of the responsibility is really on you to be the cheerleader. And it can be difficult sometimes. And then too, like maybe this is the entrepreneurial side of things, but like, sometimes it's difficult to get that spirit going and keep it going. When you're in a work life cycle where, you just kind of get up, you do your work thing, you go home, you eat dinner, and then, rinse and repeat. And so to break up that routine and remember that like there's this community of folks around you that might be worth like rallying together about this, about this common, likeness, like Elixir. It's hard to get out of that routine sometimes. And so like the entrepreneurial spirit, I think maybe sometimes I lack that, but that entrepreneurial spirit, I think it makes it easier for folks to just break out of your usual routine and, go do this other thing and get people together.
I would love to have a little discussion just for people who are perhaps thinking about starting a meetup that's closer to where they are because they can't attend one, it's too far. Just what are some options that people have and what are some things they need to think about? I'll just kind of start with a few. One of the thoughts is it is hard in that I remember, so like the Utah Elixir meetup, I kind of took it over. It had, it was started by someone else and there's already kind of an audience that was kind of created, and they ran out of kind of inertia, and I was able to pick that up and take it on, take up the baton. And so that was helpful. But at the same time, I remember announcing that we're going to have a meetup, and I'd be preparing topics, and there might be nobody come. There might be 3 people that come. And, sometimes there'll be like 6 and it's like, yay, it was a good night. We had 6 people there, so like what can people expect? What are your guys' experience? What have they been? What should they expect when they're starting a meetup? And, what's that?
Yeah. Personally for me, yeah, maybe I'm a dreamer. And I like to dream that, it's going to be all lights and fireworks or something, and people are just so pumped to be there with you. But it turns out like that's I'm not that exciting on stage. And we're talking about development and code, right? And but where I've actually found a lot more value, surprisingly, is that meetup isn't really just about like technical knowledge and sharing that. It's building the relationship. It's actually building that community around there. And so the way that I got started into this meetup, before I took it over, I started a side meetup or a part of it where we would have a project night. And so it was focused on actually doing code and like doing kind of pair programming kind of stuff on whatever, people brought. And I would always have a backup idea of things that we could work on if no one else had an idea. And we still do that. And that's a regular thing. And, oh my gosh, the relationships that come out of that is far more valuable than what you're actually technically learning there. And so making that a regular thing and like a scheduled thing that just happens every Wednesday on, monthly or something like that, it's really easy to get into that routine then, at least for me. And the regulars that come up with that, come to those meetups, like they become true friends. And that's the whole point of this, I think. And you have a common topic to talk about, which is great. But most of the time we talk about other things that are going on in other tech circles, or, like, hey, how's the job going? Or like, I just bought a new car. It's so big, something like that. Yeah, that's been really surprising. But otherwise, like for the big event kind of meetups where there's a maybe even a stage or a podium or a big projector or something like that. Those are a little bit harder for me. So maybe I tend to favor like the smaller meetups. And so if you're somebody that is, going into this thinking that like hundreds of people are going to show up or something, like that's probably not going to happen, unfortunately. Now, in some areas, like the RTP area, the triangle area that I'm in, there is room for that. And so there might be room in your local area as well. But I think those tend to be a little bit more polyglot centric. And I find a lot of value going to those as a member. And I've given the talks at those as well. So I try to essentially like evangelize a little bit of Elixir there at those polyglot meetups. And so the one around here is modern web, and it's typically JavaScript heavy, but there's a lot of good stuff that's going on there. And I like to insert a little back-end development and Elixir there every once in a while. So yeah, those are some of the lessons that I've learned is like the personal relationships is much more rewarding to me. Sometimes it happens in smaller meetups, and don't get discouraged. I've been discouraged a lot. When you go into a meetup thinking that like there's going to be hundreds of people there, no, that's not going to happen, probably. And that's okay. That's totally okay. Perseverance, I think, is a really good character trait to have as a meetup organizer.
Yeah, I'll add, I think the desire for community and relationships is pretty core to making it work. So before I organized the Nerves meetup, I was helping to organize a Utah Ruby users group meetup. And I helped to organize that for a couple of years. And similar to some of the other experiences that I shared here, the group already existed. The previous maintainer was moving away. And so I took over doing some of the organization. It does take a lot of energy. It takes energy sometimes on days where it's hard to give energy to something like that. But, and sometimes there'd be like, 5 people that showed up, and that could be really discouraging. But I remember one time after a small meetup getting a message from someone who was just coming out of a boot camp, and this person sent me a message, and they're like, that was so amazing. Every time I've tried to go to something like this, I just end up feeling so intimidated, and people were really nice. And people like came up to me and asked me how I was and how I was feeling about programming. And they gave me like introductions to jobs, and thank you so much for putting this together. I think you kind of have to hold on to those messages because that's a huge value. Just helping one person bridge that gap into the world of having a job like this is actually that's a pretty significant change to the world around you. And if, one of those people sent me a message, it probably means there were several others who had an experience like that. And their messages were directed maybe to other people at the group. So I would say anyone wanting to organize something, kind of prepare yourself that building a community and building relationships is the primary positive outcome that you should be looking for. I think getting standing ovations or YouTube videos with millions of views or something like that, probably not in the cards. There are better ways to accomplish those goals if those are what's invaluable to you at this time. But helping other people to get jobs is an amazing thing. Helping people to form relationships. And I wish I could find it. I did a quick search, but Avdi Grimm a little while ago, he's someone I've followed for a long time. And he had a tweet where he just said something along the lines of the biggest return on investment he's seen throughout his career is making friends and talking to other human beings. And that those relationships time after time turn into the introduction to the awesome next job that you're going to get, or an introduction to a programming hero, or getting connected to a project that totally solves the problem that you've been banging your head against the wall on. So I'll just second that. That has also been my experience, and it has become increasingly true as my career has progressed, right? Like in the first 5 years of my career, there weren't a lot of those moments. And in the next 5, there's some more. And I'm in like the years 11 to 15 right now. And it feels like it's happening a lot. So I would say it's worth putting in that work, especially honestly, if you're early in your career. It's a great time. It'll feel very intimidating, but it's an amazing time in your career to get out and to do some speaking at meetups, helping to organize. Even if you just go to a meetup and you walk up to any one of the organizers and say, hey, is there something I can help with? There's probably like hey, if you could help to find one person to give a talk next month, that would be great. There's probably something that they would love your help with. And being a little bit of a prop to help someone else who's not at a great place to give a lot of energy to something will help that community to thrive, and will also help other people to get value out of that meetup. And that's almost certain to come back around to you in some way.
Yeah, huge props on that tip. There were literally 0 times someone came up and said, hey, can I help with something on the meetup? And I said, no, I don't have anything I need help with.
Yes. But I will also kind of plus one what Michael was saying there, just the value of the human relationship. I remember when I was younger and, kind of new in my programming career, I felt it was insincere to go and kind of schmooze, right? Like I was trying to, network for selfish reasons. And that was my only motivation. And it's just kind of like the whole wrong mindset, just like what Michael and David have both been saying. It's really about meeting people and just feeling like there is a sense of community. I'm not in this alone. There are other people that find this cool technology, and then just being able to help other people. Like, getting positive. If you go to a meetup, say thank you. That right there is contributing to the ongoing success of the meetup. Just going there and just talking to people, just saying, hey, how are you? Just meeting them. Having those sideways discussions, not even with the presenter or anything, just like building the community. And that is really how you find jobs and opportunities. It's just because of networking. It's like, hey, people get a sense of who you are, and oh yeah, they have a good culture. I know where they would fit. I know somebody who's looking for somebody, and they're kind of right at their skill level, and it just makes connections. So don't go into it with the mindset of I'm doing this to self-service myself, but just kind of become part of the community.
We've been recording Ruby Rogue since 2011, and we've talked to a lot of people who have had a really deep influence, not only on the programming community, but also on the Ruby community. And as we've talked to these people, it's become apparent to me that we talk a lot about the things that make them interesting that they've done, but we don't really get into how they got into programming, or how they came up in their career, how they got to be the person who invented whatever library or technique that they came on the show to talk about. And so I put together a show where we actually highlight these things. We talk to them about how they got into programming. We talk to them about how they got into Ruby, maybe how they got into Rails. We get a little bit deep into what makes them tick and why they are the way they are. And then we talk about what they're working on. We talk about the things that make them well known or make them interesting. And a lot of times it's the stuff that goes beyond the code that really makes these people tick and makes them the kind of people that we want to hear about. And so I put together a show called My Ruby Story. You can find it at myrubystory.com. And it's where I interview these people and just get the stories of these people and how they came into programming. So if you want to hear inspirational stories or get ideas on how you can actually advance your career, then go check it out at myrubystory.com.
So one other thing I just want to mention is the idea when you're going to host a meetup, most of the people who come are going to be new to the language and they're just checking it out. They just kind of want to know what is this Elixir thing? And they're kind of looking to be taught. So, sometimes like for our meetups, we'll have maybe a lightning talk kind of intro, shorter thing. And lots of people at different skill levels can give a lightning talk, even if it's just like, this is the tech I've been playing with, or, hey, I found this cool date time parser that these tax guys put out. And, let me show you how it's helping solve a problem of mine. Just little things like that contribute to the whole overall experience for everyone. And then sometimes, you might have a bigger presentation that goes really deep on something. Half of the audience will be like, shoom, over their head. So you kind of want to keep in mind who's coming, what they're looking for. Ask people, what would you like to learn about? What would you like to talk about? Any other tips you guys have?
I would say from the other side of the fence, if you don't have time or the skill level to run a meetup for your language, just show up. Like the most discouraging thing to an organizer is when there's no one there, they took time out of their life, their family, whatever, to present and put this on, and there's 0 people. Like, that kills a meetup. I've seen it happen in my area where just people stop showing up and, they die, and that's a tragedy. So if you're not there, just go. Say thank you. And that's giving back, and that's going to go a long way in your community.
Yeah, the value of presence, I think, is really, it's really important. Just being there. I tend to, just thinking about it myself. Yeah, there's a lot of meetups here in the Triangle area, and a lot of JavaScript things, a lot of DevOps things. And I get notifications from meetup.com all the time. That seems to be the place where everyone organizes these. And a lot of times I'll just hit archive on that email and just not go. But you're right. Yeah, just being there and being part of it, you'd be really surprised at what value you would get out of that. Another tip is, as an organizer, is try not to make. Yeah, I think we've already said it, but try not to make it a show. This is about real connection, I think, and. Lightning talks are really good about this, where you provide a variety of topics, but then also of people and personality. So if you find yourself constantly being the speaker, probably need to find some variety of voice and mix it up. I think everybody's going to be in for that. And side benefit is that it won't burn you out either. It's really easy to, just keep on pouring and pouring and pouring. And then you get to this place where you just don't think that everybody is reciprocating the way that you thought they should. And so you burn yourself out and maybe stop doing the meetup. That's a bad thing. But if you organize like a lightning talk, maybe, don't put the pressure on everybody or on one person. It should be a lot less pressure to just come up with like a 5-minute thing of, hey, this is something cool I learned this week, and show it off. Doesn't even have to be about the top, about Elixir, for example. It could be about anything. Like, I learned this cool pattern in React. Is there anything about that, like this in Elixir? Or just leave it at about React. Everybody's doing React nowadays anyway. So those are some of the tips that I have. The main point of the main responsibility of the organizer, I think, is just to provide a space and a good feel for everybody to come.
I'll do another tip for organizers is find people who are new to programming that show up, and really encourage them to come back and give a lightning talk, or just to share what project they're working on at work or whatever it is. I've found that there's a real sense of like everyone wants the person to succeed who's talking, but that's actually amplified when someone is perceived as being relatively new, either new to this language or new to programming or whatever it is. actually, people love the underdog story that is kind of baked into a lot of us. And I think the whole group, like your most experienced programmers, a lot of time, they love to see a young person come in and be enthusiastic. And even if their content is not the most effective or not the most nuanced, the old timers are going to be like totally rooting for that young person to go. And also a lot of times, if you are, let's say you're later in your stages of having a family or balancing those time constraints with trying to run the meetup, being able to lean a little bit on some of the people who are newer and who have a lot of enthusiasm and maybe have more time availability than you right now is a great way to kind of get a sidekick, someone who's going to come in and be able to do some of the rallying and keep the energy going. There was a 9-month period when I was organizing a local meetup where I didn't have a lot of energy to put into it, but there was a few people who were had in their first programming jobs, and they just felt like unit testing was going to solve the world's problems. And that was actually an amazing period of time to be in that meetup group, because it was a very positive place. It was very idealistic. And honestly, as someone who sometimes was skeptical about my software career, it was really infectious to be around these people who were so enthusiastic. And all the skepticism in the world couldn't divert them from saying like, no, I'm going to go deliver a useful piece of software to my users that makes their life better. And it really reinvigorated me for a time. So I just think anything you can do to encourage people who are newer to your language, to your community, to your area, whatever it is, just try to get them involved and let them be a strong voice in that group. It has universally paid off for me when I've tried to emphasize that.
That is awesome. Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And it really does. The enthusiasm becomes infectious. And, you showing your enthusiasm, seeing other people, like Michael's talking about, other people like being new to something, and they're having this enthusiasm of like, wow, Elixir can do this. Well, like pattern matching is kind of like they're just seeing the light bulbs switch on is a very rewarding experience. So it's awesome. So I would love to hear about other ways we contribute to the community. And one of those is conferences. And like right now, this is recorded just prior to ElixirConf being in Denver. And so this will go out after it's already over. Yay, that was awesome. Good. I was glad to see everybody there. That was cool.
Best ElixirConf yet. I can't believe they announced that.
Right. And, but that is a big conference, and people may not be able to make it either for scheduling reasons or cost, or because maybe their company is not willing to pay for it. I know in the early days when I started attending conferences, I was paying for it all out of my own pocket, and I was going to Ruby conferences. And so I was choosing the cheaper conferences and the regional conferences, and I had wonderful experiences doing that. And there are a lot of great Elixir regional conferences. And so a lot of those tend to be single track, which means there's just one set of talks going on. And there's some benefits for that. And one of the ones I've noticed is you don't miss a talk that you want to attend. And there's a great break for everyone to meet and kind of mingle. And they tend to be smaller in terms of attendance size. So you get a chance to meet more people and actually create connections. I'd be curious about your guys' experience with conferences and what you'd recommend.
Yeah, I've only been to ElixirConf, so I don't have a lot of experience there. But the last time I went, which was in 2018, I told myself, like, this is great. And this is when Live View was announced. And I think when Scenic UI was published, I was like, oh, this is so great. Like this conference was incredible. And you get to see, the folks that have contributed to Elixir so immensely, put faces to names. But despite that, after the conference was over, I told myself I was going to go to Gig City Elixir and the Big Elixir, which are on my side of the country. So it'd be a little bit cheaper for me to get there. And yeah, I mentioned this when I was talking about meetups, is that I think I tend to favor, smaller crowds, more personal, personal conversations, and going out to lunch and dinner with folks. I feel like that might be able to happen a little bit better at smaller conferences. Maybe not. I'm sure you could. Of course, you can have dinner and lunch with folks anywhere you go. But yeah, the Gig City Elixir, which is in Chattanooga, and the Big Elixir, which is in New Orleans, and that's actually later this year, October for Gig City and November for the Big Elixir. And then Cory, you've been to a couple smaller ones too. Do you remember what those were like?
Yeah, so my last conference was Impex down in LA, so regional local conference. And to Mark's point, like the highlight for me was that it was single track. And Michael's talk on nerves was actually my favorite. And to be honest, if I was at a multi-track conference, I probably wouldn't have gone to see his talk because I don't work in nerves. I didn't think I would in the future. And it was so entertaining. It was so approachable. And it's like, wow, this is stuff I could do, for fun. And it made me excited about nerves. And that was a huge benefit to me and kind of an encouragement to check out those local things and, sit through those talks. And you might be surprised about, things that you wouldn't have seen otherwise.
MPEX was a really well-run regional conference for sure. That's actually the only Elixir conference I've gone to so far, which I guess conference is the way I need to give back more to the Elixir community, but it's just something that's hard to make time for at this stage. So I'm actually really bummed I will have missed Elixir Conf by the time this podcast comes out, but hopefully I can get a little out to a few more this next year. And I dropped a link for the Elixir Lang repo keeps a wiki page about upcoming conferences. And I was just scrolling through it, and it's pretty notable how much the number of conferences has changed. Like in 2015, there are 2 conferences listed for the year 2015. In 2016, it jumps up to 6, and by 2019, there's 15. So I mean, this is a really cool time to be in the Elixir community. There's going to be a lot of regional conferences that are relatively new that haven't been around for very long. That means there's organizers who really, really want to find someone who's interested to talk and interested to share their excitement and their enthusiasm about Elixir with the people in that area. A lot of those regional conference organizers are people who just want to see more Elixir happening in their geography because they want there to be more Elixir programmers to hire. They want there to be other Elixir jobs for people to be able to go get jobs in. My experience has been that most of these regional conference organizers are extremely community oriented, and they're great people to work with. They're great people to get to know because, again, a lot of times I've seen lots of times where my next great job opportunity came from just having known someone who organized a meetup or organized a regional conference, and they think of me when they hear about a job opening down the road. So big +1 for going to regional conferences. And I guess I'll try to take that message to myself as well and get out to a few more this next year.
Yeah. I've been trying to, on this note too, I've been trying to get to non-Elixir conferences where they're, it's just about development in general, and securing like a speaker spot there to talk about lessons I've learned in development, and then using Elixir as an example, as a good example, and serving more as like, here's some good things that I've learned, and it's because of the awesome patterns that I got out of Elixir and OTP, for example. And I'm sure that that's going to introduce Elixir to a lot of folks that may not have been exposed to it before. And so I'm hoping that like Elixir even breaks out of our own organized conferences, and that we can, start showing up a little bit more at these other non-Elixir conferences. I've been working on that. I haven't gotten one yet, but maybe somebody out there will get an idea and get out there. One that's here in Raleigh is called All Things Open. So I've been trying to get there to talk about Elixir.
And it is often those smaller conferences where you have a greater opportunity to be a presenter, just because you don't have so many headline names that are attending. So it's like you do have an opportunity to share wisdom, experiences, and things like that. So like I presented at an Open West conference about 2 years ago and talked about software estimating. estimating time. So there are lots of ways that we can kind of contribute to the community. And I just want people to kind of be aware and kind of be thinking about some of the opportunities that might exist for them. One last topic I thought was interesting is just David and I had kind of talked about this, like how meetup.com is this place where it is a great mechanism for discovery and finding what other meetups are available and around you. And it's free as an attendee to kind of register interest in different topics and kind of be notified about opportunities. One of the problems is it's super expensive. Like it's recently become more expensive. So it's, what is it, $200 a year now?
Yeah. They just raised the prices. I got an email from them. And, I've always, I don't know, I have mixed feelings. I really like meetup.com. They're good. Like they're the place for organizing meetups. They've coined it. They're their Kleenex of tissues, and I took over the fees for it, and I'm just paying them out of pocket, and it's fine. It's not bad yearly, but once I got the email saying, hey, we're going to raise prices, and now it's just about $200 a year, it got me thinking. I was like, oh man, how much do I really like Meetup? That they're going to remind me of how expensive they are. Because when you think about it, they're just a calendar and an email list, right?
Yeah, I know. And some of it
more than that, but
some of it, they don't even do their job very well. So, at least from my experience. But
someone needs to organize an activity pub focused meetup replacement where you can host your own and people can put new front ends on it, but it's shared data.
I agree. I think this is a market ripe for some disruption.
There's a really solid activity pub implementation in Elixir. One of the main Mastodon servers is written in Elixir.
Oh, wow. Nice. So I did want to let people know if they're considering hosting a meetup, having a company to sponsor it is helpful financially. Also, when you're getting started and your attendance, people who are registered as members, is small, it doesn't cost anything. One of the things I've considered doing is making it so that I'm going back to the free model and just using it for discoverability and then pointing them somewhere else. Here's a mailing list to join. Here's a, website. I don't know. But
that's sneaky. Yeah, I think it tends to like be a, what do you call it? Like, I can only equate it to like high school stuff, where you get these like honorifics in high school, but what do they really mean? Like when you graduate, you get these little cords because you're part of the honor society. What does that really mean? You paid the membership fee, you didn't actually do anything. And so I find that happening a lot. Something like that on meetup.com, where folks just like they join all of the meetups in the area and they get these notifications, and that's the value of it. But as an organizer, that means I have like 800 members, and there's no chance for me to be able to get back to the free model at this point. Like the meetup.com, they know this. They know what they're doing.
I know. All right. Well, I'm not here to bash on anyone who's actually providing a service. At least I'm not going to do it anymore.
Here's what quick pro tip: run an online meetup, because then people just find you on Twitter.
Yeah, I think I saw somebody doing one on github.com, and they do the meetups like via issues on there. I thought that was an interesting idea.
Oh, that's cool.
Because that's another good social media platform too,
Yeah.
Interesting, yeah.
So there's lots of opportunities. Keep an open mind, look around, just find ways. I think it's great to just find ways to contribute. And one of those is just being willing to volunteer to someone else's meetup. Just saying, hey, I'm willing to give a 15-minute presentation about something. That is huge as an organizer. That is such a big deal. And it's really welcome. So is there anything else we want to talk about before we transition? All right, let's go to picks. Josh, do you have something?
I think I do. So I'm just going to share. I might have shared this before, but not for a while at least. So the Elm time package, because we were talking about dates and times, and is a really solid argument for storing your times, like your historical times, just in POSIX time. And I like it. So just thought I'd share that. Very simple pick today.
Cool. Michael, how about you?
All right. I have a pick here. It's called Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. It's a podcast. It's also a book. So it takes a second, right? Bear with me. It is fan fiction. That's the bad news. Literally everything else after that is much better. So I became kind of fascinated with scientific methodology and how I can apply it to engineering several years ago. And around that time, somebody else gave me a suggestion to listen to this podcast. And I've now listened to the whole story 3 times, and I'm on my 4th listen right now, which is like, I'm not generally someone who rereads books multiple times, but the thing is, it's just packed with references to like interesting scientific studies and things about cognitive bias and how to make rational decisions and when you're lacking information. It is just like packed with advice that I actually now use on a very regular basis in terms of how I write software, how I run a team of software engineers. So for me, it's been an extremely valuable source of learning, and it's packaged into a very fun to listen to format where you have some familiar characters, but the primary pitch of it is, if instead of growing up in a really terrible family situation, Harry Potter was instead raised by loving parents. One of his parents is a college professor, and so he grew up basically being very aware of things like rationality and probabilities and statistics. And so when he gets to the wizarding world, he's just like, what is this? And he's trying to study magic as a scientist, and then gets caught up in all sorts of interesting adventures that force him to realize that there's lots about the world he still doesn't understand. So I don't know. There's no way I can give a recommendation which is too strong to at least give 1 episode a listen, because I think you'll know by the end of the first episode if it's something you're into or not. That's my pick.
That sounds fun.
It reminds me of Marvel's What If series. Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Nice. So the one I was going to share is coming. So 2 days ago, Phoenix Live View was officially released to Hex PM. And prior to that, it was, in order to use it, you'd basically having to do a GitHub link to the GitHub repo and like the master branch or a tagged branch or something. So, I realized that after 2 weeks after ElixirConf, maybe that's old news, but it's still something I thought was cool. So to make up for that possibly being outdated now, I was going to share one other. So there's this fun little website that is called anvanka.com, I guess. And what it is it'll draw dependencies for JavaScript libraries that are on NPM. So that you can pick any library that you want and just kind of visually see as it goes and pulls up all the dependencies. And like you can do this for libraries that you use, be it React or Vue or Ember or anything like that. You can also use it. So I'm dropping in the link to the show notes. Is one where it gives a 2D kind of split out of Webpack. And you just kind of got to watch this because it just kind of keeps going as it keeps discovering more stuff. And but it helps you to think about the dependencies and what we build on top of. So there's 2 aspects to that, right? There's we build on top of the shoulders of giants, like we're already standing tall on top of this layer and we're going further. But then there's the other aspect of I have a responsibility because I may be delivering these things and depending on these things for my project or my users, and they may have security vulnerabilities. So it's kind of being aware of things like that. So that's it. That's 2 for me. David, how about you?
Yeah, I have a non-programming pick. It's a site called OC Remix. It's just a website that collects video game music remixes, and they're pretty high quality. If you're anything like me, you can't listen to words, when you're developing, and I really wish I could be that person that could listen to like podcasts, like during work, but I just can't. Like the words, I concentrate too much on it. And so in place of that, I try to listen to some wordless music. And so sometimes it's just, classical music, but a lot of times it's video game music, which is actually designed to be, stimulating certain areas of your brain without, stealing your focus. Now these aren't the original soundtracks. These are, remixes of them, and it's all free. So you can listen to them on the website, and they even produce albums, which is kind of neat. So I grew up with video games, so like Zelda is my jam. Zelda, Mario, Final Fantasy, that kind of stuff, and they all have incredible soundtracks. And so this site collects a lot of good remixes on those, and they're really easy listens.
So do you find yourself like with your thumbs moving, like a little jump sequence?
Yeah, I'm a fidgeter. My wife hates it.
All right, Cory, how about you?
All right, I got 2 picks here. One of them's a job at Taxjar. We are currently hiring for an Elixir engineer, remote, currently open right now. So if you're looking for a job, hit it up. The second one is Jose Valim did some Twitch streaming. Some people are not familiar with this. I learned so much from these videos. It's raw, uncut, so it's hard to watch at times because they're so long. But if you can sit through them, like you can see him like breaking the problems apart using, the Elixir language, and it's awesome. Like I highly recommend everyone to go through and watch those videos of Jose Valim. So those are my picks.
Very cool. I'd totally forgotten that. I'd heard about those, but I'd never actually gone and checked them out. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes so you can see what that looks like. All right. Well, I've had an awesome time talking with you guys. I know we've come up to the end of our time. If people would like to get in touch with you or follow up on a topic or follow you online, where would you direct them to go to do that?
For me, it'd probably be Twitter. I'm on Twitter as Bernheisel, and we'll be in the show notes.
I've got an old blog that hardly gets updated, but all my contact info is there. So schmitty.me.
Cool. And we will have links to those. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for coming on. Thank you for your contributions to the community, both in organizing meetups, in attending meetups, in attending conferences, and libraries, everything. And that goes for you too in the audience. We appreciate all the things that you do to help make this community a greater place to live and a more welcoming place for other people to join. That's it for today. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us next week on Elixir Mix.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest